Welcome, everyone. For those who just joined, we are going to be starting in about a minute. So get your favorite drink ready, your favorite morning drink ready, and we will get started super soon. Great. It looks like we have most folks in the room. So good morning, everyone. Thank you all so much for joining us today. It's great to see so much interest in this transit talk today. My name is Guillermo Rogel, and I'm the legislative advocate with Front and Centered, and I will be your moderator today. Front and Centered continuously collaborates with TCC, mostly down in Olympia with the legislative advocacy that we do, but it's really good to be here today to do some more programming with community members and hear about some of the experiences that our panelists will be talking about today. Front and Centered is a coalition of 70 community-based organizations here in Washington State, rooted in communities of color, led by communities of color. Our role really here in Washington State is to make sure that lawmakers, policymakers across the state are understanding the importance of environmental justice. We recognize that the climate crisis today is impacting frontline communities in adverse ways, and there are disproportionate impacts to the climate crisis that we face today. Whether that be extreme heat events, whether that be access to transit, we know that environmental justice should sit at the core of the climate change movement here in Washington State. Today's transit talk is hosted by Transportation Choices Coalition, a policy and advocacy organization in Washington State that brings people together to advocate for safe, sustainable, and equitable transportation across Washington. Transportation Choices envisions thriving transit-oriented communities where people of every race, class, ability, and zip code can get where they need to go. We would like to first take a moment and acknowledge that while we are gathering today virtually, our panel is joining us from the unceded lands in the Pacific Northwest. We are calling in from the tribal land of the Coast Salish peoples, specifically the Duwamish and Nisqually people. We are dropping a resource in the chat and invite you to learn more about the land you are on, and we welcome you to acknowledge it in the chat. Before we get started, I want to point out just a few things about our virtual space. We've enabled captions for this event. If you would like to show or hide subtitles in the main room, you may do so by using the options at the bottom of your Zoom screen under live transcript. And please use the chat to ask questions and expand on discussion topics. Of course, please be respectful to panelists and each other. You can send questions in the chat or privately to McKenna Lux. And this webinar will be recorded and shared with you once it's available. Now, I'd like to introduce our incredible panel of speakers. Today, we are joined by Dr. Charles Patton, Equity Policy and Initiatives Program Manager at Puget Sound Regional Council. Let's get a little applause. Anya Patak, Transportation Equity Program Manager with Seattle Department of Transportation's Office of Equity and Economic Inclusion. We are also joined by all three citizen representatives from the Intercity Transit Board of Directors, Don Melnick, Justin Belk, and Sue Pierce. Don and Sue are all voting members of the Intercity Transit Board of Directors. Don also serves as the authority representative on the Transportation Policy Board, and Justin Belk serves as the board's vice chair. Today's panel will discuss community and rider representation in transportation policy and decision-making. The speakers will discuss Puget Sound Regional Council's Equity Advisory Committee, the Seattle Department of Transportation's Transportation Equity Work Group, and the Intercity's Transit Board of Directors. Rider perspectives are an important piece of transportation policy decisions. Everyday riders can offer insight that come from outside traditional policymaking worlds. Community representatives can greatly contribute to how planners, engineers, leaders, and officials view the potential impact of their decisions and help ensure that transit networks are built for those who use them. And for us coming from Front and Centered, part of the core of environmental justice is the sense of a just transition, that community members really are at the tables where these important decisions are getting made, whether that be transit spaces, governance spaces, budgeting. It's really important for folks who are affected by the decisions being made at these decision-making tables are actually having a voice, providing recommendations to really help carry the work forward in a community-centered way. So we're excited to dive into the topic with our panelists today. So for the panelists, this first question for you all is a little bit of a three-piece. So if you need notes, just feel free. But I want to start by hearing more about your experience with community advisory groups and what your groups look like. What committee or group do you support or serve on? And what kind of input are members asked to provide? The last question to that piece is how do committees work to ensure that members truly represent your communities and center people who use transit and active transportation networks every day? So we're going to start with Charles and then head over to Don. So Charles, you want to kick us off?
Absolutely, love to. So welcome. Good to see you all this morning. It's a pleasure to be with you. Charles Patton, I support PSRC, or the Puget Sound Regional Council's Equity Advisory Committee. For those of you that aren't familiar with PSRC, we essentially develop tools, we develop policies, coordinate decisions about regional growth, transportation, economic development in the four-county region, King, Kitsap, Pierce, and Snohomish, working with a lot of our elected officials, council members, county executives, mayors, coordinating those policies and those decisions, and also offering resources and tools for them. The Equity Advisory Committee in our second year now is a committee that works to co-create tools with staff, advise PSRC committees and policy boards on various policies and programs, bringing an equity lens to those conversations, something that was much needed at PSRC. Really happy that we've moved in this direction and can have those insights at the table. To answer your question, how do we ensure that our members truly represent community? We try to actively engage with community-based organizations all across the region that are truly connected to community, addressing topics related to transportation, but also housing and economic development, letting them know who we are. A lot of folks don't know who PSRC is and what we do, so we try to introduce ourselves, let them know how we impact community, why the work that we do is relevant to the outcomes of our residents all across the region, and what we've done thus far to address equity so they feel comfortable, confident, reaching out to the people that they serve and encouraging them to apply to serve on the Equity Advisory Committee. So that's been really helpful. Additionally, we have an application process for the Equity Advisory Committee. Part of that application process includes allowing members of the EAC or Equity Advisory Committee to participate in the review process, bringing their insights from serving on the committee to let us know who they think would be a good fit and what skills would be helpful for our committee. We also have an interview process that allows us to really have a one-on-one conversation with the applicants, get a better understanding of their passion for their work, their background, actually addressing issues related to equity and making sure that we have folks that truly represent community, that are reflective of the people that we want to serve, so that we can bring those insights to the decisions that we're making.
Thank you so much, Charles. Don, we'll turn to you, same question.
Thank you. I got some notes, so I'm going to be sort of reading from those. I'm a retired civil engineer, and for as long as I can remember, I've been a public transit geek, first in King County and more recently in Thurston County. I've also been fortunate enough to travel widely and ridden buses, trolleys, subways, light and heavy rail in many places throughout the world. After moving to Lacey 18 years ago and serving 2 terms on the Lacey Planning Commission, I applied to serve on the Intercity Transit Community Advisory Committee. I was interviewed by a selection committee composed of existing CAC members and authority members, and my selection was then formally approved by the authority. And then following 4 years as a CAC member, during a community-wide search, I was selected to fill one of the 3 community member vacancies on the authority, remaining authority members being elected city and county officials. And to talk about equity, I think equity has been a relatively new term and locally, and I think between our staff and CAC members and the authority, we've really strived to engage people that are really transit users, and also community members who are keenly aware of the value of public transit. That's my presentation.
Thank you, Don. kick it over to Anya, and then after Anya, we will go to Sue.
Thanks, Guillermo. Good morning, everyone. I'm Anya Pintak. I use she, her pronouns. I'm SDOT's Transportation Equity Manager, so at the City of Seattle Department of Transportation. I have been at SDOT, gosh, since 2018, and the group that I support and support as staff is the Transportation Equity Work Group. And I have been working with the work group since before they even came to fruition. I've been engaged with the work in terms of building the work group's infrastructure. And we are going on to the 5th year now in our department of having this work group within our Office of Equity and Economic Inclusion. So I feel very honored and very privileged to be able to work with the TEW members, as we call them for short. We have 12 TEW members in the group. Each of our TEW members are Seattle King County community members who are also affiliated with community-based organization, nonprofits, coalitions serving community. And so our representation is incredibly diverse in the sense that many of them are, for example, in organizations that are providing housing services to community members, or they are an organization serving people experiencing homelessness. Our members both have personal lived experiences as well as community connection in terms of serving BIPOC communities and vulnerable communities. And when the group first convened in early 2019, the group was first tasked to co-develop with the department our first ever transportation equity framework, which is a really big deal in the sense of that we never had an equity framework for our department before then, but really came into this work in relationship with the community members and not having this expectation that we know everything when it comes to equity priorities and goals and needs of the communities who especially are most underserved. And so really working with them from the ground up to build this equity framework and the implementation plan. And so from 2019 to about late 2021, we worked with the group to co-develop that. And then we released the Transportation Equity Framework and the implementation plan to the public in early 2022. And so we're actually in the 2nd year of implementation now, and the group is still very much an active group. This was the decision that they really advocated for. And so we continue to engage in a relationship with them, especially in terms of policy advising as it relates to the implementation of the Transportation Equity Framework and the tactics and values and strategies that we could co-develop with them. Similar to what Dr. Charles Patton shared, we work to ensure that members represent the communities through several layers. One is we do have an application process. We do have specific qualification and eligibility that we co-developed, especially with the TEW members. And so we have an application process. We also ask that the organization that they are affiliated with also sponsor them, that they submit a letter of support indicating their engagement with the organization, how they would be uplifting their community voices if they participate as a member of the group. And we also have an interview process after the application piece, and the interview process, I would say, engages both current TEW members to be engaged with that, as well as staff. And we also have members of our Race and Social Justice Initiative Change Team, which is internal, to be a part of that process too. And I would say that beyond just centering folks who use transit and active transportation, one of the core pieces that we've heard, especially in relation to Seattle, is displacement concerns. And so beyond just the different modes of transportation, a lot of our members are really coming in to share the more holistic way their communities are experiencing transportation inequities. And with that, I'll pass my word back to you, Guillermo.
Thank you so much, Anya. Really great work. Sue, we'll kick it to you, and then Justin will be our last panelist for this question.
Thank you. My name is Sue Pierce. I've been a member of the this is my 4th year on the Inner City Transit Authority Board. I am a citizen rep for previous to this, I was 6 years on the Citizen Advisory Committee, as Dawn had mentioned. And for 18 years before COVID, I was riding the bus from Lacey to Tacoma as a commuter bus. So I have a variety of experiences. Our Community Advisory Committee provides input to the Inner City Transit Authority. They provide input to our board. They meet once a month. Right now, they're still currently meeting remotely. And we get transcripts. We receive transcripts of their minutes of their meetings. So we're able to see the wide variety of comments and the discussion that they are having. And that information not only helps the board as we make decisions, but that information is available to staff as they make presentations both to the advisory committee and then quite often follow that up with similar presentations to our board, which has maybe been adapted to meet the questions or the concerns that the advisory committee has. And I think Justin probably can flesh that out a little bit more. Thank you.
Thank you, Sue. Justin?
Yeah, I just want to share. My name is Justin Belk. I'm also on the Inner City Transit Authority with Sue and Dawn, one of the citizen representatives. And similarly, I also served some time on the Community Advisory Committee prior to this. And so just to expand on what Dawn and Sue have mentioned, I feel incredibly lucky to be that ITA has citizen representation with a voting seat at the table alongside the elected members of that board. While the elected board or the elected officials are there for a reason, we offer a different perspective. We're a little more grounded in our, tied to the community. And I think our previous involvement, all three of us with the CAC, certainly helps inform that further. And so, yeah, like Sue said, a lot of those topics and discussions that come up in CAC meetings, the outcome and the minutes from those meetings help inform the conversation further as we make decisions at ITA about voting on policy and budget and so forth. And I think it was really enlightening for me when I joined the CAC. I mean, there's a bit of an application process and on there to try to get good representation. There's some short questions and check boxes for people to identify what role they feel like they fit into the community, and then also some expanded questions for people to elaborate on their thoughts about transit locally. And so, I certainly came to the table and also have a technical background like Dawn, being a transportation professional and a writer by choice. I bring a certain perspective, but it was really heartening to see when I got to the CAC, kudos to the process, because while a lot of people were already asking after a few meetings, that I saw people were asking hard questions, challenging questions that came up for me, but also I was hearing questions that I never would have thought of. And so, I bring one perspective, but I can't represent in the normal course of my life all of the perspectives that there are. And so I think the CAC does a good job of capturing a snapshot of our community, and that's a formal vehicle to get that elevated through the citizen representatives to the voting board to help inform decisions. So thank you.
Thank you, Justin. Yeah, thank you everyone for answering that question. So I heard a lot of similarities in some of the decision-making spaces that you all were mentioning. And this next question is going to be for Anya, Dawn, and Charles. But how does member input influence decision-making? And how do you ensure members have real power in these spaces? So I'll start with Anya.
Sure. Such a great question. And I think one of the biggest pieces of this work is making sure that community members are in spaces with decision makers within the organization. And so the Transportation Equity Work Group members over the years, they have had an opportunity to work with program managers and program owners and SDOT leaders for folks to hear them, to hear their recommendations and advice. And so a lot of the spaces that they're in are engaging very much in policy and strategy discussions with staff. And I think that's a really important piece. We hear it a lot from community, especially that decisions are made a lot of the time at the policy level. And so if you don't have community members engaging at the policy level, and oftentimes by the time it gets down to a project level, decisions have been made. And so we heard that very clearly. I will say too, how do you ensure members have real powers? It takes years. Power building takes years. And I think a big part of it too is relationship building and building trust with community. Trust comes at the speed of time. And so I get asked this question a lot, I'm not surprised that it took close to 3 years to create the Transportation Equity Framework, because it took time for us to really facilitate spaces with community members and staff to relationship build with one another. And so a key piece to this was not just learning from each other about our lived experiences, but also what are challenges and barriers you're experiencing as community, and then what challenges and barriers are you experiencing as government staff when we're trying to create change internally. And so having these very transparent dialogue between staff and community members, I think it sounds like such a soft skill, and it's almost not quantifiable in a way, but I think that's such a great way to really ensure that members have power and change can be made.
Thank you, Anya. Trust comes, what'd you say? Trust comes with the speed of time. I'm going to use that one. Thank you so much, Anya. Don, same question for you. How does member input influence decision making, and how do you ensure members have real power?
Perhaps if I just expand a bit on what Justin and Sue said about our community advisory committee meetings. Typically, they happen monthly. And typically, one member of the authority sits in to observe and comment. And CAC members are briefed in detail by, in our case, the general manager and key staff, and the issues are discussed at length, really at length, until people feel they've heard everybody's been heard. And then detailed minutes are prepared, typically 9 or 10 pages, that are shared with the authority before the next meeting. And typically for authority members, for authority meetings, one CAC member sits in to observe and comment also. And I think the net result of this, having a discussion with high-level authority staff, really makes it fair legitimate that community members on the CAC are being heard. And really, the whole exploration, there's no question is too dumb. Whatever questions are asked, the authority staff does their best to answer them and to hear the input. And having both served on a CAC member, like both Sue and Justin have, and now serving on the authority, I think we can see how the CAC input is really valued for each proposal.
Yeah. Thank you, Don. Yeah, and I get that about asking questions. I see a lot of community members struggle sometimes to understand very basic structures, and they're afraid to ask those questions, and government staff can just roll over community members if they don't have the resources or knowledge to participate. So thank you for mentioning that. Dr. Charles Patton, same question to you.
Absolutely. Great question. We take a co-creation approach with our equity advisory committee members. So we typically have multiple meetings if we're discussing a policy or a tool or anything that we're working on. So we'll have this first introductory meeting, get them familiar with the topic, let it sink in, let it resonate with them. Then we'll follow up maybe at the next meeting. And that's when we'll actually dive into the topic a little bit further, having a discussion, getting their thoughts about how we can improve and elevate equity in that policy or that tool. And then we'll at least have one more meeting where we follow up with them, close the feedback loop, ensure that the ideas that they shared with us previously were appropriately incorporated into that document or that policy or that tool, just to make sure we're on the right path and be able to address anything that's not what they envisioned it would look like. And so that's the approach that we took for the regional equity strategy, which for those of you that aren't familiar with that, that's PSRC's suite of tools that we're creating to elevate equity at our agency and also provide some tools and resources for our member jurisdictions so they can elevate equity in their work that they do. So things like an equity tracker or equity dashboard, inclusive engagement guidance, things of that nature. Really excited about the approach that we're taking, this co-creation approach, not only for the regional equity strategy, but for our new equity transportation pilot, which will be used with $6 million of FHWA funds to reimagine how we do project selection in the 4-county region, how we allocate funds for this regional competition, bringing more of an equity lens to this work. So I really tried to take more of our time, like Anya kind of said, taking the time to really sit with the members of the Equity Advisory Committee, dive into the topic of project selection. How do we currently do it at PSRC? What have other MPOs like PSRC done related to issues of equity? How have they incorporated equity into that process? And then we had a simulation exercise where the members of the Equity Advisory Committee actually evaluated projects from 2022 using our current process, so they can kind of look under the hood, see how we currently do it, what's going well, what's not going well, and really allow them to wrap their head around this process and get a better understanding of it. So that was the first phase, the first quarter of 2023. In April, we began the second phase, which was really that discussion-oriented conversation, asking them questions about what principles we should keep in mind with this pilot, what ideas from other MPOs did they like and what they like incorporated into our equity pilot. From June to August, we're going to start really having the EAC members work alongside staff in staff meetings, ensuring that the ideas they shared with us previously are appropriately incorporated into the pilot. So really excited about this opportunity. We've done it in the past. It's worked really well. The insights that we gain from working alongside one another are extremely helpful. They the EAC members really give us a better understanding of how we can work around barriers that we kind of run up into and bring those insights that we typically don't have at our staff meetings. So that's been fantastic. And we're really looking forward to replicating that for the pilot. And then after that, we're going to learn what went well, what didn't go well. And the goal is not just to create a pilot. We want to use this pilot to inform how we use the $300 or $290 million in funds every year for transportation to elevate equity more effectively into that process. So really excited that we're able to work alongside them, get these insights, and just reimagine what this process can look like moving forward. So that's just a little snapshot of how we typically go about this process.
Yeah, thank you so much for that. Yeah, and I understand, a lot of time folks are volunteers in these spaces, and to get to work alongside staff who this is their full-time job and see how their brains think, how they work through problems, maybe even some of like the internal gossip that goes on at these agencies. It's just good for volunteers and community members to see some of that internal process that's going on. So thank you, Anya, Don, and Charles for that. We're going to move on to our third question. And this is going to be for Charles and Anya. What challenges or pushback have you experienced in either putting together a community advisory board or participating as a writer voice? How did you face or overcome that? So let's go with Charles again, and then Anya, you can close us out with this question.
Absolutely. One challenge that comes to mind is elevating members' level of power to have a vote with our boards. That's something that we currently don't have right now, and we're thinking about what that could potentially look like at PSRC. This was a concern that was raised by the AHEAD group, which was a group of folks that helped design the bylaws for the Equity Advisory Committee, or the operating procedures, folks from all across the region that have been doing this for years and years and years, connecting community to government agencies in some really innovative ways. And a staff member from TCC was actually a part of that group, Hester. For the folks that know Hester, she was fantastic, and really grateful that she made the time to help us with that, with designing the Equity Advisory Committee. One thing that came up was they were concerned that limiting the Equity Advisory Committee to solely be a recommending body could potentially lead them to be in a position where they have these fantastic ideas, really could have a tremendous impact on community. And regardless of how helpful or innovative or fantastic the ideas were, they could be potentially dismissed by our boards. This is bad for obvious reasons. But one thing that they shared with us was that in the past, with committees like this, it can be extremely deflating, that experience, to have these great ideas and for them to be dismissed by the boards. And it can lead to a lot of folks on a committee like this to becoming disengaged from the work as a result of that experience. That being said, our boards have been fantastic with the Equity Advisory Committee. They've been really receptive to their ideas. Really value the insights that they share and acknowledge that this has been something that's been missing from PSRC for quite some time. However, I think the concerns are still valid. So we're in the early stages of exploring how the EAC can have voting power on our boards so that they can have some power and some influence behind the recommendations that they're making. That will require us to amend our bylaws. So that's what we're looking at right now. However, I think if we're successful moving down this path, providing them with this influence and this power, I think it will move us to be truly reflecting and embodying our definition of equity at PSRC, which is to have those that are affected by poverty, communities of color, historically marginalized communities, truly engaged in decision-making processes, engaged in planning, engaged in policy making. I think it'll be a strong step to really embodying that definition and becoming a more equity-oriented agency. So excited about the path that we're on, and I'm looking forward to seeing where we land.
Thank you. Anya, same question for you. What challenges or pushback have you experienced in putting together an advisory board and participating as a writer voice? And how did you overcome that?
Yeah. So great question. I will say an internal kind of organization challenge I dealt with back when I was setting up the infrastructure was, I think this was at that time in terms of working with community on co-developing an equity framework, any type of like kind of big values decision-making was so new to the department. And I think there was a fear of sharing power. And I think I got a lot of pushback in terms of, are we ready to do this as a department? How do we ensure that we manage the expectations? And I'm a social worker by training. I'm not a planner. And so there was a lot of kind of deep one-on-one conversation for me with staff in terms of understanding, I want to hear a little bit more. Where is this fear and concern coming from? And I think a lot of time when there's fear of sharing power, especially in government, is because we've never done it before and we don't know how to do it. And I think it's about being fearless and really leaning and knowing that, we don't have all the answers, and in sharing our power with communities that live in the neighborhoods and communities that we are serving, that is the best way that I think, as public servants, we should be doing our work. So I think that was a big challenge just in terms of like the fear of the unknown. Within the group, I will say one of the challenges is we do so much at SDOT. We're a 1,200 person organization. We have transit work. However, we also do a lot more than transit. We manage our right of way. We have street trees that we're taking care of. We are doing policy work, such as creating our 20-year vision plan. We do so much in the department. So one of the challenges was, how do we onboard community members into the diversity of our portfolio? So we have a very in-depth 3-month onboarding process to be a part of the group.
Great. That's really good practice. I know for one of the councils that we at Front Centered work really close with, a community council, they jumped right into the work. And by that time, agencies had already worked 6 months in preparation for the community council to get ready. So there was no time for onboarding and no time for, this is what we mean by, this is the work we do at Department of Transportation. This is who we are, and this is how you can work with us. So that onboarding process, I think, is really crucial when setting up spaces like this. Thank you all for covering some of those challenges. This one's going to be for Sue, Justin, Anya, and Charles. But what advice or thoughts do you have for other organizations or agencies looking to form or expand their community advisory positions? Sue, I'll start with you, and then I'll kick it over to Justin.
Okay, that question could take a whole webinar hour. Basically, if you're starting out and you haven't had one at all, take a firm look at what you're looking to be advised upon. I hear, agencies have some very specific topics or projects that they have advising on. Our advisory group is 21 members. 20 members. One of those members is a student, a youth position, and that tends to be a high school or a college student, and they go through the same application and interview process as the other applicants for the CAC. So consider what you want them to be advising you about, how broad that might be. And along with that, there's a whole bunch of things that come in together even before you put out the first advertisement or the first outreach for people. The size of the group. We have, as I said, we have 21 members. That's pretty good size. Consider the term or the length of time, the length of the commitment, both that you're asking of them, and then how long they are permitted to stay on your committee or your board. Our CAC starts with a 3-year term, and if they choose to continue, there's another 3-year term for a total of 6. On that, based from that first initial application and acceptance. And certainly we have members who step away before that for whatever reasons. So those are things to consider. And then also, how often would they meet? CAC meets once a month. And with the pandemic, that was occasionally canceled as necessary, but it's scheduled for once a month, and it's continually ongoing. So as people step away or time out of the committee, it's a staggered membership. So keep that in mind also. And I think that gives you enough to start with. I'm sure Justin will have a few other ideas.
Thank you, Sue. Justin?
Yeah, thanks, Sue. I do want to acknowledge from the last question, I would encourage any group looking to expand their representation to try to overcome whatever structural challenges you may have to get somebody a voting voice, a voting member on a board that makes the decisions. I think that's something to aspire to as far as direct decision making from the community, like we have to some extent. But then taken back to the CAC that Sue was talking about, I would encourage in your application process to try to be as inclusive as possible. And so I mentioned earlier, there's an application form, and you can kind of identify what role you feel like you fit into the community. And in the last few years, we've been fortunate with an abundance of applicants, and really strong pools of people who want to be involved, and that's great. And you could be tempted to have a filter and look at a smaller subset, but we've strived to interview everybody that has submitted an application, because people present differently on paper than they do orally. And so, we've had either a virtual Zoom or in-person interview with nearly everyone that has expressed an interest. And so that way you can hear out what more they have to say in that portion of the interview. And you might still come to a fairly hard decision. And now who do we choose to be on the few open seats that we have? But you've done your best to try to get a better understanding of who wants to come to the table and provide input, and potentially elevate voices that just would not have necessarily presented well on a paper application. So, and then one more point to that, I think during the pandemic, those interviews went to online, and we've interviewed people while they're riding the bus. And so try to be as accommodating as you can. That way you are truly getting the best snapshot of your community and elevating voices that may traditionally not have been given the opportunity to before. So thank you.
Thank you, Justin. I remember doing some sort of panel on the light rail one time and losing signal as we headed into the tunnel. And that was, just a small accommodation. But let's go with Anya and then Charles. Same question for you all is what thoughts or advice do you have for other organizations or agencies looking to form or expand their community advisory positions?
Yeah, I totally agree with Sue. I mean, I think being clear with roles and expectations of the community advisory group is very, very important, and also being transparent and communicating and clear with them on that too. I would say one of the biggest things, and there's been a couple of questions related to compensation, is making sure you have a budget. We do compensate our TEW members, and they go directly to the individuals, not to the organizations. That's something that the community members were very vocal and supportive on. And we also additionally compensate our co-chairs for the work that they're doing as well. So the budget, though, my recommendation should not just include compensation for your community members, but also thinking about the staffing level. It takes a lot of staff time to support a community advisory group. We have 12 members currently. Every person's situation is different. And so there's a level of support that community advisory groups need from a staffing end. And also within the context of the TransStation Equity Work Group, the work that they're doing is very much related to organizational change. So there's the support of the community advisory group, but then there's also the internal work with SDOT staff that also needs to occur, that we are also infusing the TransStation Equity Framework that we co-developed with community is being implemented across the department. And that also takes staff time as well. And so the budget piece is just something I really, really emphasize and highlight. It's so important. You cannot be asking to do this work to community members to do it for free. And also for the staffing support that needs to happen. And my last piece is, I would say, be flexible, nimble, and also patient as well. I think those are incredibly important things to have when you're going into this work.
Anya, Dr. Charles Patton.
Absolutely. I'll echo something that Anya shared earlier, just about the trust piece. I think that advice has been critical to us being able to make the progress that we've been able to make. This was advice that I also received early on in developing the structure for the Equity Advisory Committee, recognizing that it takes a lot of time on the front end, but that the time that you invest early on in the process will more than pay off in the relationship that you're able to build as a result of that, and the quality of input and the quality of people that you have invested in your work as a result of those relationships. So I think what that looks like is making sure that you attend their events, promote and support their work, invest in them, do anything that you can to change the dynamic of the relationship from the typical one-way street where we're just taking from our committee members to making a two-way street, and we're investing in them and using our resources to elevate all the great work that they're doing. And I think as a result, it's just improved the quality of suggestions and advice and input that we received. And it's just a better experience overall, just having people that you have this relationship with that you're working alongside. We also have a compensation policy. I think that it has allowed us to have a quality of applicant and quality of participant that we would not have had if we didn't have the compensation policy, removing that barrier, whether that's for travel or childcare or food, so people can attend our meetings. And I think it's increased the likelihood that the people that we get to apply to the EAC actually have the experiences that we need and have better insights and expertise around the topics that we're covering, and we don't have the standard people that we typically have before the compensation policy. So it's been extremely helpful. One thing I would suggest related to compensation is to make that process as easy as possible, complete as much information as you can. The people that you get on these types of committees have a lot of things on their plate. They don't have a lot of time. So anything that you can do to make it less time intensive, they really, really appreciate. And I think that makes them even more invested in your work because you value their time and what they bring to the table. So yeah, I'll stop there.
Thank you so much. Actually, before we move to questions, Dawn, is there any advice you give to organizations looking to expand their community advisory positions?
Not exactly, but equity is a relatively new term in Thurston County, with all due respect. You might expect that. And I really commend Anya and Charles for the roles you're playing in Kane County. And I might want to get your contact information and perhaps engage you sometime in the future. And
Thank you,
you
Don.
too, Guillermo, because you seem quite sensitive. We're just learning about it here. To talk about compensating volunteers, not volunteers. Because I live in Lacey, and I've begun to learn about the Lacey has a commission on equity. And one of the things they're pursuing with staff is compensating planning commission members and other staff who heretofore have been volunteers. And I think your point is well taken, that will encourage people who might otherwise not be interested to be willing to invest some of their time, because they're going to be compensated at least in some way with hard dollars that they can, and that might not otherwise be able to participate. So thank you very much.
Thank you, Don. So that's all the questions that we had prepared for the panelists, but we did receive some great questions from you all during registration and in the chat during the conversation. So some of the members already covered their compensation rates. So I'm curious, maybe Anya and Charles, if you can talk specifically about what those rates are. I see in the chat that some folks have gotten Orca cards as compensation. I've seen other ones. They do different kinds of gift cards, but what's the compensation rate that you two use?
Sure. So for the Transportation Equity Work Group, our compensation rate is $75 an hour. And how I got to that number was really looking at our sister department, the Department of Neighborhoods, who has the Community Liaison Program. And they are working with community members who are supporting a variety of projects and programs across the city. And we had a couple of community liaisons who were kind of wearing two different hats, as well as being community members. Now, so that's the compensation rate for the Transportation Equity Work Group. Transparent facilitation and transparent sharing out is that, I also look at the overall budget too, because beyond just compensation, there's also staffing, there's also language access, there's also other items that I need to also fit within the budget. And I'm very transparent with the TW members in that sense. I just want to say this because I get asked this a lot for the same question from internal staff, what is the compensation rate? And I don't believe that there's like a blanket compensation rate that could be used as a standard for all community advisory groups. And my advice would be start with, again, what is the expectation and the role of the community advisory group, and going from there rather than like trying to fit a rate into a community advisory group. So I think it's really important to start with what is your expectation and what is your ask of the tasks and goals of the group. Pass my word to Charles.
That's a great point, Anya. So I'll start with our rate. We pay $125 per meeting. We have 2-hour meetings. But what is requested of the EAC members is not only to attend that 2-hour meeting, but is to come prepared to those conversations. So there's time that's involved in that. There's also, we might ask follow-up questions. So we might have surveys. No, $125 per hour. I apologize.
Yeah.
That's $125 per meeting. So it's a 2-hour meeting. So split that in half. And then additionally, our co-chairs have meetings with us prior to each equity advisory committee meeting. So they're compensated for their time and providing us suggestions and ideas about how we can improve our presentations and what the EAC members might have questions about or what might be unclear. So that expertise is extremely valuable, and we pay them for their time there. Additionally, as we're having conversations about the voting and having members of our EAC vote on boards, if we do go down that path, they will be compensated for their attendance in those board meetings as well. So anytime we're asking them to show up at a meeting and provide their insights and do some legwork ahead or after those meetings, we try to compensate them for that time and their expertise.
Thank you so much, Anya and Charles. We have a question on how these committee advisory groups, how do they differ from individual advocacy? Is there anything individuals can do to support community advisory groups? I'll throw that out there for the group if there's anyone that wants to answer. Sue, go ahead.
The advisory group comes, we invite them in, and in our instance, we present them with presentations and ask for their input and their conversation. But along with that, they certainly go out and talk with their neighbors and their friends and the people that they feel they represent, whether it's another organization or just in their neighborhood and that kind of thing. And so the information spreads. As far as individual advocacy, we're very lucky in that Intercity Transit and their staff is very open to the comments and the questions that come in through the emails and any comments to the customer service line and that sort of thing. And certainly in the instance of a public entity, there are times when they can make their public comment periods, usually during public presentations, and they can always contact to ask any questions or provide any advice that they feel is pertinent to the organization.
Thank you, Sue. To folks, Don, go ahead.
I would only add, if an individual advocate has the time, I would encourage them to participate on a community advisory committee, because really the synergy between staff and other people who are members is really healthy in my experience. And you may come with some expertise which would be contributed, but I think you would get more response, with all due respect, if you could join a committee. Some people don't want to do that. That's their choice, and they can make input other ways. But I think it's really a healthy dialogue. At least it has been for us.
Thank you, Don. One of the last questions is, how do you ensure that agencies are accountable for addressing input provided by these groups? I'll leave that one. The group, if anyone wants to answer it.
I'm happy to chime in. So in addition to having an external transportation equity work group, when we were developing that infrastructure and getting that going, we also developed an internal transportation equity intradepartmental team of staff. And so we have within SDOT, within the IDT, we have 41 staff representing each of our either 1 to 2 member from each of the division. And this is where the internal accountability comes in the sense of that group. When we were co-developing the framework, we started developing a relationship between the IDT staff and then the TW members. And now that we're in implementation, the IDT continues. And my role is working with the IDT members to check in, support, how are you all implementing the equity framework that we co-developed? And so I think that's a really great question, because that's another important piece, is what, again, is the internal structure to be able to hold staff and the entire department accountable and moving the work forward. So there's this like inside outside feedback loop of communication.
Thank you, Anya. Charles, did you want to add something?
Yeah, I was just gonna echo what I said earlier about having kind of the Equity Advisory Committee members participate in staff meetings. I feel like that has in the past really held staff accountable to have an EAC member in that space, really highlighting what was said in an EAC meeting and the thoughts and the concerns and the ideas of the EAC members in those staff meetings, and having a back and forth to provide that level of clarity, I think has been extremely helpful. I really appreciated how passionate the EAC members have been about this work. And I appreciated how the relationships that we've been able to build as a result, and really ensure that their ideas are appropriately reflected in the tools that we're creating and the policies that we're creating. A lot of insights have come from just that back and forth, just a different dynamic in those staff meetings that have allowed us to really truly reflect what was said and the concerns and the issues that were raised by the EAC members. So that's our approach that I hope that we can continue to push forward, moving forward even more so, to have that accountability piece. One other piece that I'll share as we're working on this equity tracker to kind of hold ourselves accountable to the thing. We're quantifying what we said that we were going to do with the EAC members so that we can track it over time and see if we're making the progress that we said we wanted to make. So that's another piece that I think will be helpful as we seek to actually do the implementation and do the work that was suggested by the EAC members and hold ourselves accountable to that work moving forward.
Thank you so much for that, Charles. And thank you to all of our panelists today for sharing your perspective and your expertise. It was really great to hear, even the work that I do really centers around this community-centered co-governance structure and making sure that their advice and recommendations don't just sit as that. That we don't want just recommendations just sitting on the table somewhere. We do want some other input to be taken very seriously. Justin, I think I saw your hand up. If you wanted to give a quick.
Yeah, I just wanted to wrap up that last question from Intercity Transit's perspective. And Don and Sue mentioned where we have ITA members sitting in on the CAC meetings and likewise CAC members sitting in on ITA meetings all the time. Another piece to that accountability is I believe we still do it, is an anonymous survey to the CAC members every year, where hopefully they provide, they feel like they can provide input about whether or not they feel like the CAC is serving its purpose and how things can be improved. And so I think opportunities for improvement would be reflected in that kind of thing. And I've seen some results where some call outs happen where, we either feel like we're underrepresented in a certain way or we can do things better. And so we try to be responsive to that. So thank you.
Thank you, Justin. Great. If you all would like to stay updated with any of the organizations represented today, TCC staff is pasting the links in the chat for you to follow. These will also be included in the follow-up email with the webinar recording. Today's transit talk is part of the statewide Ride Transit Month programming. We'd love for you to check out the other Ride Transit Month activities, including Transit Bingo and the Rider Celebration next week at the Mariners game. Go Mariners. That was not in the script. Go Mariners. Thank you all so much for joining us today, and have a great rest of your day. Thank you all.
Thanks, Guillermo, for your excellent facilitating job, moderating. Thank you.
Thank you, Don.